The ballroom glowed in almost unnatural brilliance as crystal chandeliers spilled golden light upon the marble floor, polished to a mirror shine. Servers moved with precision, carrying trays of champagne that glittered like liquid fire in their crystal flutes. The hum of conversation blended with bursts of laughter and the occasional applause as yet another accolade was announced in honor of Adrian Cole. He stood at the center of it all, his tailored suit cut to perfection, his smile sculpted like a mask of effortless charm. Cameras flashed like lightning across the room. Journalists jotted furiously in their notebooks, eager to capture the evening that crowned Adrian as the symbol of modern success. Young, visionary, and relentless, he had built his empire faster than anyone thought possible. Tonight was not merely a gala, it was a coronation. Investors, politicians, and cultural figures circled him, each one hoping a fragment of his brilliance might rub off on them. His wife Elena stood by his side, glowing in her own right for different reasons. Her beauty was understated compared to the glittering crowd, her gown elegant without ostentation. One hand rested protectively upon the gentle curve of her stomach, where new life grew. To those who glanced at her, Elena was the perfect complement to Adrian's meteoric rise, serene, gracious, and carrying the heir to his empire. She smiled when he smiled, nodded when he spoke, and radiated an aura of quiet stability that made their union appear unshakable. Guests admired them openly. Couples whispered how fortunate Adrian was to have such a loyal wife, while others envied Elena for securing a man whose face appeared on the covers of magazines. The image they projected was flawless. A young titan and his radiant wife, expecting their first child, presided over an evening that seemed carved from dreams. Yet beneath the shimmering veneer, subtle cracks ran through the foundation. Elena sensed it in the way Adrian's eyes wandered when he thought she was not looking. She noticed how often his phone vibrated in his pocket, how swiftly he excused himself from conversations to answer messages that never seemed to end. She told herself it was the cost of his ambition, the relentless demand of business empires. But a small voice whispered doubts she tried to silence with every beat of her heart. Adrian raised his glass to deliver a speech, his voice smooth and commanding, carrying across the hall. He spoke of vision, resilience, and the future his company would lead. Every word was crafted to inspire faith and admiration. Applause erupted in waves, echoing against the gilded walls. Elena clapped too, her smile fixed, her gaze steady on her husband. However, she wondered if the man standing under the spotlight was the same man who once whispered dreams to her in the quiet of their small apartment before success found them. As the night progressed, Adrian moved effortlessly among the elite. He laughed at jokes he barely heard, accepted congratulations with a gracious nod, and clasped hands with power brokers who spoke of partnerships and opportunities. To him, this was oxygen. He thrived in the intoxication of recognition, each compliment a spark that fueled his insatiable drive. Elena, meanwhile, lingered near a table of roses arranged in tall crystal vases. The scent reminded her of the garden she once tended at her childhood home. It had been simple then, life measured not by stock prices and headlines, but by seasons and family dinners. She felt strangely out of place, a porcelain figure among marble statues. A hand touched her arm gently, and one of Adrian's colleagues congratulated her on the pregnancy. She thanked him with a polite nod, her voice soft, her eyes searching the room for her husband. Adrian was across the ballroom, his head inclined toward a woman Elena had never seen before. The stranger's laughter rang like silver, sharp and bright, as Adrian leaned closer than propriety demanded. Elena's fingers pressed against her belly instinctively, protective, as if shielding the unborn child from an unseen shadow. She told herself it was nothing, a fleeting interaction in a room full of strangers, yet her chest tightened. The orchestra struck a new melody, a waltz that swept couples onto the dance floor. Adrian returned and extended his hand to Elena, guiding her forward. They moved with practiced grace, his arms steady around her, their steps in perfect synchrony. To the watching crowd, they were the epitome of romance. But Elena felt the subtle distance between them, an invisible barrier as real as glass. His hand was warm, yet his eyes drifted beyond her, scanning the crowd even as they circled together. When the final note faded, applause filled the room again. Adrian kissed Elena's cheek lightly, his smile shifting toward the nearest cluster of admirers. She let him go, her smile never faltering, though her heart whispered a truth she could no longer deny. The man she loved was slipping away, and she did not know how to reach him. Later that night, when speeches ended and the orchestra packed away their instruments, Adrian stood before a cluster of reporters giving one last statement. Elena waited near the exit, her shawl draped over her shoulders, exhaustion tugging at her. She was weary from the pregnancy and the weight of appearances she was forced to uphold. When Adrian finally joined her, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, smiled faintly, and slipped it back into his pocket with a look she could not quite read. City lights streaked across the windows like comets in the car ride home. Adrian spoke of business opportunities, meetings scheduled for the coming week, and potential expansion overseas. His voice brimmed with excitement. Elena listened quietly, her hand resting on her belly, her gaze fixed on the blur of lights outside. She wanted to tell him about the flutter she had felt earlier, the baby's first gentle kick, but the words caught in her throat. His world seemed too loud for such fragile revelations. When they reached their home, a sprawling mansion on the city's outskirts, Adrian kissed her forehead before retreating into his study, already on another call. Elena climbed the stairs slowly, her hands sliding along the polished banister, her mind heavy with unspoken thoughts. In the nursery, freshly painted in soft hues, she sat on the edge of a rocking chair and whispered to the child within her. She promised safety, love, and protection, even if the world outside proved treacherous. Downstairs, Adrian's voice carried through the closed door of his study. He laughed softly, different from the one he shared with Elena. She could not hear the words, only the tone, a blend of intimacy and secrecy. Her chest tightened again, and tears welled in her eyes. She brushed them away quickly, unwilling to let despair consume her in this house that looked like a palace yet felt increasingly like a cage. The night stretched on. Elena eventually drifted into uneasy sleep, one hand upon her stomach, dreaming of gardens and quiet afternoons that belonged to another life. Adrian remained awake, his study bathed in the cold glow of his laptop, his phone pressed to his ear. The gala had crowned him a king, but even kings carried shadows into their thrones. And as the city slept, the glitter of triumph clung stubbornly to Adrian Cole, even as the seeds of tragedy already took root in the silence between him and the woman who loved him most. Morning sunlight spilled through the expansive glass windows of the Cole residence, illuminating every detail of its immaculate interior. The marble countertops gleamed as if freshly polished. The polished oak staircase curved upward like something carved for royalty, and the quiet hum of luxury filled the air. To any visitor, this house would have seemed the home of a perfect family, a sanctuary where love and success intertwined seamlessly. But perfection, Elena often thought, was easier to stage than to live. She awoke early, long before Adrian stirred from his late-night calls and endless correspondence. Pregnancy had turned her sleep into brief, restless intervals, and she found herself wandering the hushed halls when the city outside was still wrapped in silence. Sometimes she paused in the nursery, where pastel walls waited patiently for the child who would soon fill the room with laughter and cries. She had folded tiny clothes and lined them neatly in drawers, each piece chosen carefully, as if fabric alone could shield her child from heartbreak. Elena moved with gentle grace through her routines. She prepared breakfast even though she knew Adrian would likely rush through it, if not skip it altogether. She arranged the table carefully, placing his coffee exactly how he liked it. A small gesture of devotion she still clung to despite the growing emptiness between them. Love, she reminded herself, was not always about grand declarations. Sometimes it was in the quiet persistence of care, even when unnoticed. Adrian descended the stairs at last, his presence filling the room instantly. His suit was impeccable, his tie knotted perfectly, his hair combed with precision that suggested an appointment rather than a hurried morning. He looked every bit the man who dominated headlines, the visionary whose confidence inspired investors to follow him unthinkingly. He kissed Elena's cheek absently, his eyes already on his phone. She tried to catch his attention, mentioning the baby's first movements from the night before, but he murmured a distracted response while scrolling through his messages. She smiled anyway, though it was a weary smile, as though rehearsed. To an outsider, their exchange would have seemed ordinary, even tender. Only Elena knew how many of her words evaporated unheard into the air between them. When they left the house together, cameras were already waiting beyond the gates. Paparazzi had camped outside ever since Adrian's star began its meteoric rise. Elena linked her arm with his as they stepped into the daylight, and the flash of cameras painted them as a couple in perfect harmony. Reporters shouted questions, asking about the baby, Adrian's upcoming projects, and their future as a family. Adrian's responses were smooth, effortless. He spoke of joy, anticipation, and gratitude for his wife's support. With casual familiarity, he touched Elena's back and she leaned against him, playing her part. Inside the tinted car, silence reclaimed the air. Adrian checked his emails, fingers moving swiftly over his phone. Elena gazed out the window, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. To the world, they were a power couple radiating unity. To her, they were actors in a play staged daily for an audience eager to believe in fairy tales. At the office, Adrian moved through the building like a monarch inspecting his court. Employees straightened when he passed, their eyes alight with admiration. Elena watched him from the lobby as he disappeared into a conference room surrounded by executives. She had accompanied him today because he insisted her presence offered an image of stability. Investors liked to see the family side of their golden leader. Elena was not a businesswoman, but she understood the unspoken request. She was to be a symbol, not a partner. Throughout the day, she smiled at meetings, posed for photographs, and answered polite questions about her pregnancy. Every glance at her was laced with admiration, but beneath the praise, Elena felt the sharp sting of invisibility. No one asked about her dreams, her opinions, or her struggles. She was reduced to her role, a delicate figure embodying devotion, carrying the heir to Adrian's legacy. When the day ended, Adrian whisked her to another evening function. The rhythm of their lives was endless: appearances, interviews, dinners, galas. Elena sometimes longed for an evening spent quietly together, a simple walk, a shared meal where conversation flowed freely. But such desires seemed naive in the shadow of Adrian's growing empire. He thrived on the endless whirl of recognition. She endured it. That night, after returning home, Adrian collapsed into his chair with a sigh of satisfaction, his phone lighting up again. Elena lingered in the doorway, watching him. She wanted to tell him that the baby had kicked again, stronger this time, a clear sign of life. She wanted to share her fear, the quiet ache of loneliness despite being constantly surrounded by people. But his laughter, warm and easy, drifted through the room as he spoke into his phone. She knew by the softness of his tone that it was not business he was discussing. She turned away, retreating to the nursery. The rocking chair creaked softly as she lowered herself into it. The room was filled with shadows, yet she felt safer here than anywhere else. She whispered to the child again, confiding thoughts she could not share with anyone else. She promised love, no matter what storms threatened them. The days passed in much the same rhythm. To outsiders, Adrian and Elena were the embodiment of perfection. Their photographs adorned magazines, their smiles polished, their words carefully chosen. They attended charity galas hand in hand, posed in glossy spreads that praised their style and grace. Every image reinforced the illusion of unshakable happiness. Yet, beneath the surface, Elena felt herself drifting further into solitude. She noticed the way Adrian's absences grew longer, the way his laughter over the phone carried a different weight than the laughter he shared with her. She saw how his touch, though gentle, seemed automatic, like a gesture performed without thought. Her heart ached, but she endured. She clung to the hope that once the baby arrived, perhaps Adrian would remember what mattered. Maybe the sight of their child would anchor him back to the promises they once whispered to each other when their love was young and untarnished by ambition. Still, doubts crept in. At night, when Adrian worked late or excused himself for endless meetings, she would sit by the window, watching the empty driveway, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock. Sometimes she imagined a different life, one where success had not consumed him, where love had remained uncorrupted by the hunger for recognition. But in the morning, she smiled again, smoothing her dress over her growing belly, and stepped again into the role the world expected her to play. She was the devoted wife of Adrian Cole, the shining figure at his side, the woman who completed the picture of perfection. It was a facade, flawless and convincing, but a facade nonetheless. And though she performed it gracefully, Elena felt that perfect image's walls closing in tighter with each passing day, trapping her in a life that glittered on the outside, yet echoed hollow within. Behind the facade of triumph, cracks widened quietly, waiting for the moment they would split the illusion apart. Elena sensed it even if she could not name it. Something was coming, something inevitable. And when it did, no carefully staged smile or polished photograph would be enough to hide the truth. In the quiet confines of the Carter estate, away from the flashing cameras and the shimmer of Daniel's public life, Eleanor moved like a shadow. Her presence was soft, yet profound, her gestures graceful but heavy with the weight of unseen burdens. While Daniel paraded through the world with his polished charm and carefully curated image, she remained in the background, silently upholding their home's foundation. She did not complain or break the illusion he had crafted so meticulously. Yet within her heart, a storm gathered, growing fiercer with every passing night he failed to return, with every whispered excuse that slipped so easily from his lips. Her nights were long, often spent in the nursery, her hand gently resting on her swelling stomach, feeling the stirrings of the life within her. Their child, the promise that was supposed to bind them tighter, to secure a love she had once believed unshakable. In the dim glow of the lamp, Eleanor would whisper hopes into the silence, her voice trembling with both tenderness and sorrow. She remembered the man she had fallen in love with, the one who held her hand under the moonlight, who promised her that together they would build a world of love and honesty. But now, those promises felt like fading echoes, obscured by the growing distance between them. Daniel's excuses had become a routine: late meetings, unexpected flights, crises that demanded his presence. At first, Eleanor had believed him. She had even defended him when whispers reached her ears, when acquaintances offered her sidelong glances heavy with unspoken truths. But the repetition wore her down, each excuse another stone added to the fortress of silence surrounding her. The truth lurked in the shadows, waiting to be acknowledged, yet she was unwilling to face it fully. For to do so would mean confronting the possibility that the man she loved, the father of her unborn child, had already abandoned her in spirit. Her silent vigil stretched into her days. At charity luncheons and society gatherings, she smiled with the practiced poise of a woman who carried no burdens. But beneath that surface calm, every interaction chipped at her strength. She could feel the shift in conversations, the hushed tones when she entered a room, the pitying looks offered by those who knew more than they dared say aloud. She endured it all, holding her head high, refusing to let the world glimpse her unraveling heart. The nights, however, betrayed her. Alone in the vast main bedroom, she would wake to the sound of the wind rattling against the windows, her arms reaching for a man who was not there. The bed felt colder each time, the silence heavier. In those moments, Eleanor's mind wandered to the possibility of betrayal. She imagined Daniel's laughter echoing in another woman's presence, his hands touching another with the intimacy he once reserved for her. The thought clawed at her, a bitter poison spreading through her veins, yet she swallowed it, refusing to let it consume her entirely. Her hope clung desperately to the life growing inside her. She told herself that Daniel would remember who he was once their child was born. He would remember the love they shared, the home they built, and the family waiting for him. She spoke to the baby in her quiet moments, painting pictures of a father who would protect and cherish them, weaving dreams she longed to realize. This fragile hope kept her anchored, which kept her from crumbling beneath the weight of suspicion. But signs of the truth crept closer, insistent and undeniable. There was a faint trace of perfume on Daniel's shirt that did not belong to her. A missed call from an unfamiliar number flashed persistently on his phone. His eyes looked hollow when he kissed her cheek without warmth before leaving the house. Each fragment, small on its own, came together to form a picture she could no longer ignore. The man she loved was slipping away, not to business or duty, but to someone else. Eleanor's silence became her shield. She has not confronted him yet. Instead, she observed, memorizing the details, cataloging the subtle changes in his behavior. Her nights of waiting shifted from hope to a quiet strategy of endurance. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing how deeply he had wounded her, not while she still carried his child. She endured the hollow dinners, the empty embraces, the lies wrapped in polished words. Her silence was not weakness, but a calculated decision. She would not fall apart before him, nor before the world. Yet, as the days turned to weeks, her silence bore heavily on her soul. Loneliness carved deep lines into her spirit, eroding the joy that once defined her. She longed for a touch, a word, a sign that the man she married still existed somewhere beneath the mask he wore. But Daniel offered nothing. His world revolved elsewhere, around someone who was not her, someone who had stolen the place she had once held so dearly. There were moments, however, when Eleanor's strength shone through the cracks of her despair. She found solace in preparing the nursery, choosing colors and fabrics, imagining a future where her child would grow surrounded by love, even if that love came solely from her. She spoke with her parents, her voice steady and calm, concealing the storm raging inside. She maintained the outward image of a devoted wife and expectant mother, even as she battled the growing void within her marriage. The nights of her silent vigil grew longer, the shadows deeper. Once filled with laughter and warmth, the house now echoed with emptiness. Eleanor became both guardian and prisoner, bound by her silence, sustained by her fragile hope. She waited, always waiting, for the moment when Daniel would return to her in truth, or for the inevitable collapse of the illusion she had clung to for too long. In the stillness of those nights, Eleanor began to understand something profound. Her silence was not just for Daniel's sake, it was for herself, a way to gather strength, to prepare for the day when the truth would no longer be avoidable. She knew it was coming, that the fragile veil shielding her from the reality of his betrayal would soon shatter. And when it did, she vowed to face it with the quiet dignity she had always carried. For now, though, she kept her vigil, alone in the darkness, her hand resting protectively over her unborn child. She whispered promises to the little one who was her anchor and hope. She would endure this storm, she would protect them, and when the truth finally emerged, she would be ready. Ready to face Daniel, face the world, and reclaim her strength from the silence that sustained and suffocated her. The days grew quieter for Elena, though the house around her was filled with luxury and light. She moved slowly through its wide hallways, her hand often pressed against the curve of her stomach, listening to the steady rhythm of her child's movements. The silence seemed heavier than before. Where Adrian's presence had once filled the air, now only the echo of his footsteps lingered as he left for meetings, calls, and late-night dinners that stretched until dawn. At first, she tried to convince herself it was temporary. Success demanded sacrifice, and Adrian's empire was growing faster than ever. She told herself that things would settle once the company stabilized and the baby was born. They would reclaim the intimacy they had lost, the laughter that had once come so easily. But as the weeks passed, she realized that the distance was not circumstantial. It was becoming permanent. She ate most meals alone now. The table, once a space of warmth and conversation, had become a place of quiet ritual. She would set a plate for herself, sip tea, and chew slowly while staring at the chair across from her. Sometimes she left Adrian's plate untouched, covered in foil, hoping he might return before it grew cold. Often, she woke the next morning to find it still there, untouched, a silent reminder of absence. Her prenatal appointments became solitary events as well. At the first appointment, Adrian promised always to be there. He had held her hand as they listened to the faint heartbeat, eyes shining with pride. But by the third month, he was absent. By the 5th, he stopped even apologizing. Instead, he sent flowers, expensive bouquets of orchids or roses delivered to the clinic with his assistant's card. Nurses smiled at her, whispering how lucky she was to have such a thoughtful husband. Elena forced a smile in return, but inside, she knew flowers could not hold her hand when fear surged through her chest. At night, she sometimes left little notes on his desk, reminders of her love. A few words scribbled in her careful handwriting. "I felt the baby kick today. I miss you. Let's have dinner together." She imagined him finding them after long meetings, pausing, smiling, and tucking them away as keepsakes. But weeks later, she discovered them still on the desk, hidden beneath piles of papers. Some were crumpled, others stained with coffee rings. The sight hollowed her. Loneliness seeped into her like water through cracks. She tried to fill the emptiness by preparing for the baby, arranging tiny clothes and folding blankets meticulously. She painted the nursery with soft pastels, choosing every detail as if creating a sanctuary could shield her from despair. She whispered lullabies in the stillness, her voice trembling as though the child inside her was the only one listening. On certain evenings, when Adrian returned before dawn, she heard him laughing softly into the phone in the study. The tone was intimate, different from the brisk cadence of his business calls. Elena stood once in the hallway, her hand resting on the wall for support, listening to his voice carry through the closed door. She could not hear the words, only the laughter, warm and tender. A kind of laughter he had not shared with her in months. She turned away quickly, her stomach twisting, not just with pregnancy, but with the sting of betrayal she dared not name. She began to feel invisible in her own home. The staff greeted her politely, yet their eyes followed Adrian with reverence. Friends called less frequently, assuming she was too consumed with motherhood to socialize. Even her family spoke to her as though she were merely an extension of Adrian, asking after his achievements before they asked about her well-being. She was surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. Sleep brought little relief. Dreams came fragmented, filled with echoes of Adrian's smile from years past, the promises they had made when life was simple. She dreamed of their small apartment with mismatched furniture, of nights when they ate pasta from chipped bowls and laughed until dawn. She woke each time with tears staining her pillow, realizing those days were gone, replaced by silence and distance. Her body ached from carrying the child, but her heart ached more. Sometimes, when exhaustion overwhelmed her, she would sit in the nursery's rocking chair, stroking her belly and whispering to the baby. She told stories of the garden from her childhood, mornings filled with birdsong and afternoons spent chasing sunlight through the fields. She promised her child love, a love unshaken by ambition or betrayal. She promised that they would not be alone, no matter what happened, even if she felt entirely abandoned. One evening, Elena prepared a special dinner, determined to recapture something of what they had lost. She cooked Adrian's favorite dish, arranged candles on the table, and wore a dress he once told her was his favorite. She rehearsed in her mind the words she would say, how she would tell him about the baby's progress, how she would reach for him one more time. Adrian never came home. Midnight passed, then 2 in the morning, then dawn. She sat at the table until the candles melted into puddles of wax, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her belly. She blew out the last candle at sunrise and cleared the table alone. The untouched food felt like a monument to futility. In those moments, Elena understood that she was living with the ghost of a husband. The man she had once loved, who cherished her laughter and craved her presence, was slipping further away each day. He existed in the eyes of the public, in the glossy magazines and glowing interviews, but not here, not with her. She walked into the nursery afterward and lowered herself into the rocking chair. The room was quiet except for the faint creak of wood beneath her weight. She pressed her forehead to her hands and whispered through trembling lips. She told her unborn child that they would face the world together, that she would be strong enough for both of them. But even as she said the words, tears slid down her face, betraying the fear she carried deep inside. Adrian's absence was no longer a shadow at the edges of her life. It was the defining presence, filling every room and moment with silence. And though Elena still held on to the hope that things might change, She knew that love was no longer enough to bridge their growing chasm. Her solitude had become her reality, and her whispered promises to her child kept her anchored as the world she had built with Adrian slipped further into darkness. Clara Whitmore had always been a woman who understood the currency of desire. She moved through the world like a melody half-heard, alluring yet elusive, drawing people in without ever giving them the satisfaction of fully knowing her. From the polished tiles of luxury hotels to the velvet-draped lounges where the powerful whispered secrets over champagne, Clara navigated her ascent with the grace of a predator cloaked in silk. Her affair with Daniel Carter had begun not as a chance meeting, but as a carefully orchestrated encounter. She had studied him from afar, tracing the outlines of his life through press releases, interviews, and society columns. She knew the kind of man he was, ambitious, restless, hungry for validation even when surrounded by applause. She recognized that hunger because it mirrored her own. Where others saw a loyal husband and visionary CEO, Clara saw a man on the edge of dissatisfaction, ripe for temptation. Their first conversation had been electric, charged with unspoken promises. She had laughed at his jokes with perfect timing, leaned in just close enough for him to catch the faint perfume that lingered on her collarbone. She had brushed her fingers against his hand as if by accident, watching the flicker of something forbidden flash in his eyes. She knew she had secured his attention by the time the night ended. The rest was merely a matter of patience. Clara did not love Daniel in the way Eleanor once had. Love, in its purest form, was not what she sought. What she craved was power. The kind that came from being desired by a man who seemed untouchable, from having the ability to draw him away from the world he had built so meticulously. To Clara, Daniel was both a conquest and a stepping stone, proof of her allure and a ticket into circles she had only glimpsed before. Every stolen evening, every whispered conversation, every kiss in the shadows became another rung on the ladder of her ambitions. She reveled in the secrecy. There was a thrill in the stolen glances across crowded rooms, in the hurried phone calls late at night when Eleanor slept unaware. The risk made the passion burn brighter, the danger wrapping each moment in a haze of forbidden ecstasy. Clara knew the world would judge her if the truth emerged, but judgment meant nothing to her. Power was worth the whispers, the scandal, the shame. Daniel, for his part, became increasingly entangled in her spell. With Clara, he shed the responsibilities that weighed on him. He was not the CEO bound by shareholders and expectations, nor the husband bound by promises he no longer cared to keep. With her, he was raw, reckless, and free. She fed his ego with admiration, stroked his doubts with affirmations, and reminded him that he was still the man who could command attention in the boardroom and the bedroom. The affair was not without its complexities. Clara often felt the sting of Daniel's divided life. There were moments when he left her waiting in a hotel room, hours ticking by as he dined with Eleanor or attended public events as the picture of a devoted husband. These slights burned her pride, igniting a fire within her, but Clara was not a woman easily dismissed. She countered by reminding Daniel of what he risked losing, whispering words that stoked his restlessness. She made herself indispensable, entwining her presence with his desires until he could not imagine returning to a world without her. Her rise was not just about Daniel. With every appearance on his arm at private gatherings, every photograph snapped discreetly by a curious lens, Clara's name began circulating among the elite. She was no longer just a fleeting beauty. She became the woman whispered about behind fans. The name dropped in conversations with equal parts fascination and disdain. To Clara, this notoriety was intoxicating. It meant she was winning. Yet in her pursuit of power, Clara underestimated the depth of Eleanor's silent strength. She dismissed the wife as weak, naive, a woman too blinded by devotion to challenge her place. In Clara's eyes, Eleanor was merely an obstacle already half erased, a fading shadow in Daniel's glittering world. But what Clara failed to grasp was that Eleanor's silence was not surrender. It was strategy, a gathering of resolve that would one day become a force to reckon with. Still, Clara pressed forward. She cultivated an image that contrasted Eleanor's dignity with her own vibrancy. Where Eleanor offered calm grace, Clara exuded fire and passion. She dressed in bold colors, spoke with unfiltered confidence, and carried herself like she had already claimed victory. Daniel's world grew smaller, his loyalty increasingly tied to her flame, even as Eleanor took his child beneath her heart. There were times, late at night, when Clara allowed herself a sliver of vulnerability. She wondered what her life would look like if Daniel truly left Eleanor. Would the thrill remain once secrecy was stripped away? Would Daniel's restless hunger turn on her as it had turned on his wife? These thoughts haunted her in rare moments of solitude, but she quickly silenced them. Doubt was a luxury she could not afford. To win, she had to believe in her own inevitability. The affair deepened, and with it, Clara's demands grew bolder. No longer content with fleeting moments, she pressed Daniel for permanence. She wanted more than whispered promises. She wanted to be seen, to stand at his side in the light rather than in the shadows. The tension between them simmered, passion entangled with power, desire laced with ambition. Clara's ascent had brought her to the brink of triumph, but the higher she climbed, the more precarious her position became. There was the looming risk of exposure for every secret meeting, every hidden kiss. Clara knew it, and so did Daniel. The walls of secrecy that had once protected them now threatened to close in. And while Daniel grew restless under the weight of his double life, Clara thrived in the chaos, convinced that her victory would rise from the ashes of his unraveling. In those days, Clara believed she was unstoppable. She saw herself as the woman who had conquered a man the world revered and rewritten the power and passion narrative in her favor. She did not yet know the storm gathering on the horizon, or hear the whispers of fate closing in. For now, she basked in her ascent, her eyes fixed firmly on the glittering heights she believed were hers to claim, unaware that every upward step brought her closer to a devastating fall. The morning began like any other, with the soft hum of the city just beyond the estate's iron gates, and the distant echo of a life that seemed untouchable. Daniel Carter rose late, his head clouded from a night spent away from home, his thoughts still tangled in Clara's perfume and the reckless whispers that lingered from their secret rendezvous. He expected to find Eleanor in the kitchen, her presence steady as always, perhaps seated near the window with a book in her hand, her calmness masking whatever storm brewed within her heart. But as he descended the stairs, the house's silence struck him like a sudden chill. The rooms were too still. The curtains remained drawn, the usual scent of morning tea absent. A strange unease gnawed at him as he called her name, his voice echoing unanswered against marble walls. Eleanor did not reply. Her shoes were gone from the rack, her coat missing from its place by the door. A single folded note on the dining table, the paper trembling slightly in the morning draft. His hands hesitated before unfolding it, as though the truth it contained might cut deeper than he could bear. The handwriting was unmistakable, her script elegant and deliberate. It carried no anger, no dramatic flourish, only a quiet finality that chilled him more than fury ever could. Daniel, I cannot continue this charade. By the time you read this, I will be gone. Do not look for me. Take care of our child, should you ever remember what love means. The words blurred before his eyes, his breath catching as their weight sank into his chest. She was gone. Eleanor, who had stood by him through every rise and fall and carried his child with unyielding faith, had vanished without a trace. Panic surged through him as he tore through the house, searching for some clue, some sign that she had not truly left. The nursery stood untouched, the crib still waiting for the child who would never know the steady warmth of their mother's hand. The closets hung half-empty, the absence of her clothes screaming louder than any confrontation could. It was not an impulsive departure. Eleanor had planned this, slipping away with the quiet determination that defined her. Outside, the autumn air bit at his skin as he stumbled into the driveway. The driver shook his head when asked if he had seen her. None of the staff knew where she had gone. She had moved like a ghost, vanishing into the night while Daniel lost himself in another woman's arms. News of her disappearance spread faster than Daniel could contain it. Within days, whispers filled the city, newspapers spinning tales of betrayal and abandonment. The Carter name, once synonymous with power and success, became the centerpiece of a scandal. Headlines asked pointed questions. Where had Eleanor gone? Had the golden couple fractured beyond repair? And what of the unborn child she carried? Daniel's world, so carefully constructed, began to crumble. Investors grew wary, their confidence shaken by the rumors of instability. Business associates avoided his calls, unwilling to be tainted by association. Every move he made was scrutinized, every word dissected for hidden meaning. He found no refuge, not in the office, not in Clara's embrace, not even within the walls of his home, which now felt like a mausoleum haunted by absence. Clara, at first, reveled in the fallout. She imagined Eleanor's disappearance as the clearing of the board, leaving her free to stand at Daniel's side without shadows. But the reality was more complicated. Instead of celebrating their freedom, Daniel grew restless, agitated, consumed by the loss that gnawed at him. His moments with Clara were tainted by distraction, his passion dulled by the gnawing guilt he could not silence. At night, when the city hushed and the silence of the estate grew unbearable, Daniel wandered the halls, searching for traces of Eleanor. He would pause at the nursery door, his hand resting on the frame, imagining her standing there with a soft smile, whispering to the child she carried. The vision tore at him, a reminder of what he had sacrificed for fleeting desire. The memory of her quiet dignity haunted him, her silence now more deafening than any accusation. The police became involved after the Carter family petitioned for answers. Detectives probed into Eleanor's disappearance, questioning staff, scouring financial records, and tracing phone calls. Yet she had vanished without leaving a thread to pull. No credit card use, phone activity, or sightings in the city. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only questions and the gnawing suspicion that Daniel himself had driven her to it. The press fed on that suspicion like vultures. Columnists speculated about his infidelity, their words sharpened with moral outrage. Pundits dissected his every gesture, painting him as the careless husband who drove his wife into hiding. His once adoring public turned cold, and the empire he had spent years building began to fracture under the weight of scandal. Eleanor's parents refused his calls, their grief laced with fury. They accused him of neglect, of betrayal, of driving their daughter into despair. Court documents threatened custody battles over the unborn child should Eleanor reappear, or over guardianship if she did not. The Carters, once united, now stood fractured, their legacy bleeding into public spectacle. In his darkest hours, Daniel began to see Eleanor everywhere, a fleeting figure in a crowd, the echo of her laughter in a cafe, the scent of her perfume drifting through the air. Each time he chased these ghosts, they dissolved, leaving him more desperate than before. He scoured the city secretly, hiring investigators, following trails that led only to dead ends. The woman who had given him everything had taken herself and their child beyond his reach. Clara's grip began to weaken. The more Daniel pursued shadows of Eleanor, the more Clara realized her victory was hollow. She had wanted him fully, yet now he was consumed by the one woman who had walked away. Clara grew bitter, her triumph unraveling into resentment. What good was her ascent if Daniel's heart remained chained to the absence of his wife? Eleanor's vanishing became the defining moment of Daniel's life. It was not his success that the world remembered, but his failure. The wife who disappeared, the child who might never know its father's embrace, the empire tarnished by scandal. He moved through each day like a man haunted, clutching at control that slipped further with each passing hour. In the silence of his vast estate, he would sometimes return to the note she left. He read it until the paper frayed, until the ink blurred from the touch of his fingers. The words never changed, yet their weight deepened each time. "Do not look for me." And though he searched, longed, and burned with regret, Daniel knew the truth Eleanor had understood from the beginning. Some betrayals cannot be undone, and some absences can never be filled. Her vanishing was not an end, but a reckoning. It was the moment when the illusions shattered, when love, desire, and ambition collapsed into ruin. And as Daniel faced the emptiness she left behind, he realized that the most significant loss was not her disappearance, but the knowledge that she had chosen silence and distance over him, and that no amount of power could bring her back. The world had always watched Daniel Carter with admiration, envy, and a certain reverence reserved for men who seemed to hold fate in their palms. He had built an empire out of steel and glass, his face gracing magazine covers, his speeches quoted in business schools. He was a symbol of power to the public, a man who had it all: wealth, influence, and a wife who embodied elegance and grace. But when Eleanor vanished, the narrative shifted with merciless speed. At first, the news was treated with the polite caution reserved for tragedies among the elite. Headlines read, "Missing heiress and pregnant wife of CEO disappears," accompanied by photographs of Eleanor smiling softly, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The nation sympathized with her, mourning the uncertainty, hoping for her safe return. Daniel appeared before cameras, his voice carefully measured, his expression painted with worry. He spoke of his love for Eleanor, of his hope that she would come home. But the public's patience was fragile, and the mask he wore began to crack under scrutiny. Reporters dug deeper, unearthing whispers of late-night absences, questionable companions, and the enigmatic figure of Clara Whitmore. Paparazzi captured images of Daniel slipping into luxury hotels, Clara's silhouette glimpsed through tinted car windows. At first, they were dismissed as rumors, but soon the evidence piled too high to ignore. The story shifted from a tragedy to a scandal. Talk shows dissected his every move. Psychologists analyzed his body language during interviews, pointing out the stiffness of his posture and the way his eyes darted when questioned about fidelity. Once eager to bask in his glow, former associates came forward with subtle accusations, hinting at his arrogance, recklessness, and disregard for loyalty. Every word he had ever spoken in public was re-examined, every gesture reframed as evidence of a man who had lived a double life. Clara became the centerpiece of gossip. Her name, once whispered in exclusive circles, now dominated headlines. She was called many things: temptress, opportunist, homewrecker. Tabloids painted her as the villain, yet in some corners she was celebrated and admired for daring to steal the heart of a man like Daniel Carter. Photographers stalked her every move, capturing her in designer gowns, stepping out of black cars with her chin held high. She played her part well, exuding confidence even as the world hurled accusations. For Daniel, the unraveling was swift and brutal. Shareholders demanded answers, their trust eroded by the scandal that threatened to tarnish the company's reputation. Stock prices dipped, contracts faltered, and partners distanced themselves. Investors whispered about his instability, questioning whether a man consumed by personal chaos could still steer the empire he had built. Once his kingdom, the boardroom became a battlefield where he fought for control and the remnants of his credibility. In private, Daniel was unraveling faster than the headlines could capture. He drowned in sleepless nights, his mind tormented by images of Eleanor disappearing into the unknown. He replayed every moment they had shared, every time he had chosen Clara over her, every lie he had told to preserve a facade now shattered. The guilt pressed against him like an iron weight, his chest tightening each time he caught sight of the nursery door, each time he thought of the child who might be lost to him forever. Clara tried to soothe him, whispering promises of a future free from scandal, where they could reign as a couple unshaken by the world's judgment. But her words fell flat against his turmoil. The more he clung to her, the more he realized she was insufficient. She could not fill the void Eleanor had left. She could not erase the silence of the house, the absence of the woman who had carried his child and his heart with quiet dignity. Clara had won the battle for his attention, but lost the war for his soul. The public fed on his downfall with insatiable hunger. News anchors reported every detail of his crumbling marriage with grim satisfaction, as if watching the mighty fall was a sport. Online forums erupted with debates, some condemning him outright, others speculating wildly about Eleanor's fate. Had she run away to escape his betrayal? Had something darker happened, something Daniel refused to admit? Theories multiplied, each more damning than the last. Eleanor, though absent, became more present than ever. Her image dominated magazine covers, her story narrated as a cautionary tale of love betrayed. Women across the country spoke her name with sympathy, calling her brave for walking away, or tragic for disappearing in silence. She became a symbol, not just of Daniel's failure, but of every quiet wife who had endured too much. Every woman who had carried her pain without complaint until it became too heavy to bear. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel's control slipped further. Reporters camped outside his gates, flashing cameras at every car that entered or left. Anonymous sources leaked details of heated arguments with the board, of financial missteps he had once hidden behind polished reports. Scandals bred scandals, and soon his empire seemed less like a monument to success and more like a crumbling fortress, its foundations rotting under the weight of secrets. Even amid this chaos, Daniel tried to search for Eleanor. He poured money into private investigators, chasing rumors from small towns to foreign cities. But every lead ended in disappointment. She had vanished completely, erasing herself with the precision of someone who had planned her escape long before the world knew it had begun. His desperation became a spectacle, with tabloids mocking his futile attempts, portraying him as a man haunted by the ghost of the woman he had driven away. The unraveling peaked when a leaked photograph surfaced, an image of Daniel and Clara, captured in a moment too intimate to deny. The picture spread like wildfire, splashed across front pages and screens, erasing whatever sympathy the public had once held for him. His pleas for privacy and his claims of searching for Eleanor crumbled under undeniable betrayal. He was no longer a grieving husband, but a man exposed, stripped of the illusions he had clung to. In boardrooms and back alleys alike, people spoke of Daniel Carter not as a titan, but as a cautionary tale. His name became synonymous with downfall, and his story was a reminder of how quickly power could dissolve when built on deceit. And yet, amid ruin, he clung to the faint hope that Eleanor was still alive, still somewhere beyond his reach, carrying their child in a world untouched by the scandal consuming him. But hope was a fragile thing, and with each headline, each whisper, each betrayal brought into the light, Daniel felt it slipping through his fingers. The world had turned against him, the woman he loved was gone, and the empire he had built was burning before his eyes. The unraveling was complete, and all that remained was the wreckage of a man who had once seemed untouchable. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in molten shades of orange and crimson as Elena sat by her office window, staring out without seeing. The weight of her thoughts pressed heavily against her chest. She had barely slept since her discovery at the archives, and each night she replayed the connections she had uncovered, threads of deceit that stretched further than she had ever anticipated. Yet with each step forward, the shadows seemed to grow, threatening to swallow her whole. Victor's name echoed in her mind like a warning. His sudden interest in her late father's research was more than a coincidence. Every instinct screamed that his charm was nothing but a carefully constructed mask. And Marcus, with his sudden return and cryptic hints, offered no absolute clarity, only more smoke to blur the path ahead. Even Daniel, who had sworn loyalty to her since their first meeting, carried his scars and secrets she had not yet been able to pierce. The city outside hummed with life, oblivious to the storm gathering within her walls. She turned from the window, gazing at the stack of papers that had become her burden and lifeline. Maps, financial records, coded correspondences, all converged on a name she could not yet decipher. Whoever controlled that name controlled the entire chain of events, and Elena was determined to tear the veil away. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A message appeared, unsigned but unmistakably meant for her. "You are not safe. Leave before it is too late." Her hands trembled as she set the device down. Fear clawed at her, but so did defiance. She had come too far to retreat. Rising, she locked the documents back into the steel drawer and slipped the key into her pocket. Whatever game was being played, she would no longer be a pawn. That evening, she agreed to meet Marcus again. The cafe was dimly lit, crowded enough to mask conversation, but intimate enough to study every flicker of his expression. He looked worn, his eyes shadowed as though he had not slept. "Elena," he said, his voice low, "you need to trust me, at least enough to listen. Victor is not who he claims to be." She leaned forward. "Then tell me who he is." No more half-truths. Marcus hesitated. His fingers tapped against his cup as though buying time. Finally, he leaned closer. "Victor has ties to the consortium your father once fought against. He is their envoy, their face in the light, but never their hand in the dark. That role belongs to someone else, someone even I have never seen." Elena's heart pounded. "And Daniel?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "He is loyal to you, but was once part of them. You must understand that everyone drawn into this has their own ghosts. You cannot simply choose who to trust based on promises." The words stung, yet she could not deny the truth in them. Secrets clung to all of them like smoke, suffocating her attempts to breathe freely. Still, something in Marcus's tone rang genuine, weary but resolute. When they parted, Elena walked home alone through the narrow streets, her senses alert to every shadow. Then, she noticed a figure trailing her at a measured distance. She turned corners abruptly, slowed suddenly, but the figure adjusted each time. Panic licked at her spine. She broke into a brisk walk, then a run, her shoes striking against the pavement like a frantic drumbeat. She darted into an alley, pressing herself against the cold brick wall. Her breath came fast and shallow. Moments later, the figure passed by the mouth of the alley, pausing briefly as if sensing her presence, then continued down the street. She remained still until the sound of footsteps faded into the night. By the time she reached her apartment, her body ached with adrenaline. She double-locked the door, tightened the curtains, and collapsed onto the couch. For the first time, she allowed herself to weep, not out of weakness but out of exhaustion. Her tears carved silent paths down her cheeks, washing away a fragment of the fear that clung to her. The following day, a package arrived at her office. No return address, only her name written in bold, uneven strokes. She opened it cautiously to reveal a leather-bound notebook. In faded ink were detailed notes of her father's last investigations. Dates, names, diagrams, all meticulously recorded. A single phrase stood out at the very back. "The key is hidden where the beginning was forged." Elena's breath caught. Her father had left her a trail that would lead back to the origins of the conflict. She clutched the notebook to her chest, the fire of determination reigniting in her veins. But before she could celebrate the discovery, her phone rang. It was Daniel. His tone was urgent, almost frantic. "Elena, you need to get out. They know you have the notebook." Her mind reeled. How could they know? "It has only just arrived." "That doesn't matter," Daniel pressed. "They're coming for you. Meet me at the station in 1 hour. We cannot stay here." Every choice weighed heavily in her mind. Could she truly trust him after what Marcus had revealed? Or would trusting him deliver her directly into the hands of the enemy? The walls around her seemed to close in, suffocating her with indecision. Yet time was slipping through her fingers. She packed the notebook carefully, slid it into her bag, and stood before the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, pale but resolute. She had been thrust into this labyrinth of lies and betrayals, but would not falter. As she left her apartment, the city air was cold against her skin. Her steps carried her swiftly through the streets, toward the unknown fate at the station. Eyes watched her every move somewhere in the shadows, unseen, yet undeniably present. The web was unraveling, but the threat of being ensnared in its deadly threads came with it. And Elena knew, with a chilling certainty, that her next choice could either lead her closer to the truth or seal her fate forever. The station was crowded, a cacophony of voices echoing against the high ceilings as trains rumbled in and out, carrying strangers to unknown destinations. Elena stood near one of the platforms, her eyes darting through the sea of faces. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She clutched the bag containing her father's notebook so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Every instinct screamed that she was being watched, but the anonymity of the crowd made it impossible to know from where. Daniel appeared at last, weaving his way toward her through the mass of commuters. He looked tense, his jaw set, his eyes sharp and restless as they scanned the area. When he reached her, he placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "We don't have much time," he whispered. "Follow me." Something about the urgency in his tone unsettled her, but she followed, her steps quick as he led her down the platform and onto a side stairwell. The crowd's roar dulled as they descended into the dimly lit underpass. Elena's heart pounded harder with each step, her breath catching as her mind repeated Marcus's warning. Daniel stopped at a side door, pushing it open, ushering her inside. The room beyond was small, a forgotten storage space with peeling paint and the faint stench of dampness. He turned to her, his face etched with determination. "Give me the notebook, Elena. They'll stop at nothing to get it. If I carry it, they'll follow me, and you'll be safe." Her grip tightened on the bag. "You want me to believe that," she said, trembling but edging with steel. "Marcus told me about your past. He told me you were one of them." Daniel flinched, a shadow crossing his features. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across his face. "Yes, I was. But I left them, Elena. I left because of you, because of what your father stood for. I can't undo my past, but I can choose where I stand now." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant rumble of trains. Elena's eyes searched his face, desperate for truth, fearful of deception. His sincerity tugged at her, but so did her father's warnings, written cryptically in the notebook. She stepped back, clutching the bag closer. Before Daniel could respond, heavy boots echoed from the stairwell outside. Elena's blood froze. Voices called out, sharp and commanding. They had been found. Daniel's expression hardened. He moved to the door, pulling out a small pistol concealed beneath his jacket. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the door burst open. 3 men stormed in, dressed in dark suits, their movements precise, their eyes cold. The leader stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Elena. "Miss Laurent," he said smoothly, "hand us the notebook, and no harm will come to you." Daniel raised his weapon, his stance protective. "You'll have to get through me first." The room erupted into chaos. The men lunged, and Daniel fired, the gunshot deafening in the confined space. One of the men crumpled, but the others pressed forward. Elena ducked behind a rusted metal cabinet, clutching the bag against her chest, her breath ragged. Fear coursed through her, but beneath it burned something more substantial, resolve. She couldn't let them take the notebook, not after everything her father had sacrificed, not after the warning he had left her. Daniel fought fiercely, but he was outnumbered. One of the men slammed him against the wall, the pistol skittering across the floor. Elena's eyes locked on it. Without thinking, she crawled forward, her fingers brushing against the cold metal as another hand reached for it. She pulled the trigger before she had time to doubt. The man fell back, stunned, and for a moment the room froze. Elena stood, the pistol trembling in her grip, her chest heaving. The 2 remaining men exchanged a glance, then retreated, dragging their wounded companion with them. Within seconds, the room was silent again, save for her heartbeat pounding. Daniel staggered toward her, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. He reached out, steadying her trembling hands. "You did what you had to," he said quietly. Elena's knees threatened to give way, but she forced herself to stay upright. She had crossed a line she never thought she would, and there was no turning back. They left the station through a maintenance tunnel, emerging into the cool night air. The city stretched before them, alive with lights and motion, but to Elena it felt suffocating. She clutched the bag tightly, its weight heavier than ever. As they walked, Daniel spoke in hushed tones. "The notebook is more dangerous than you realize. It doesn't just hold records, it holds the key to dismantling everything they've built. But that also makes it a target for everyone, Victor, the consortium, even Marcus." His words cut through her exhaustion. "Marcus helped me," she protested. "Maybe," Daniel said, "or maybe he's playing a longer game. Trust no one, Elena, not even me, if it comes to that." The warning lodged itself deep in her chest. The fractured alliance between them hung fragile, straining under suspicion and necessity. She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her, relentless and cruel. They reached a safe house on the city's edge, a small apartment hidden above a shuttered bookstore. Inside, Daniel secured the doors and windows before collapsing into a chair. Elena placed the notebook on the table, staring at it as though it might open itself and reveal all its secrets. Her father's handwriting stared back at her from the pages, filled with meticulous detail and cryptic codes. She traced the words with her fingers, searching for meaning. "The key is hidden where the beginning was forged," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward. "That could mean the place where your father first uncovered the conspiracy. Do you know where that was?" Memories stirred within her, stories her father had told late at night about a remote village where he had once begun his research. A place he had always spoken of with a strange reverence. Could that be the beginning he meant? Before she could answer, a noise outside the window caught her attention. She froze, her hand instinctively moving toward the pistol. Daniel rose silently, moving toward the window. Through the thin curtain, a silhouette shifted in the alley below, then another. Elena's blood turned cold. They had been followed again. The safe house was no longer secure. Daniel turned to her, his voice urgent but calm. "We need to leave, now." Elena grabbed the notebook and her bag, her legs trembling as adrenaline surged anew. The fractured alliance between her and Daniel was all she had left, fragile. She had no choice but to cling to it, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of her resolve. As they slipped out through the back entrance, disappearing into the labyrinth of alleys, Elena knew one truth with chilling certainty. The web was tightening, and every step forward would demand a greater price. The alliance she shared with Daniel might hold for now, but the fracture was deep, and the day would come when trust would shatter completely. The night wrapped the city in a veil of secrecy as Elena and Daniel moved through the narrow streets, their footsteps quick but measured. The safe house was compromised, and every moment they lingered in the open tightened the invisible noose around them. Elena clutched the bag containing her father's notebook to her chest, feeling the weight of its secrets pressing against her ribs. Daniel led the way, his eyes scanning every corner, every flicker of movement in the shadows. They slipped into the warren of alleys that twisted behind the main avenues, where broken lamps cast only fragments of light, and the silence was interrupted only by the distant hum of traffic. Elena's heart raced with the echo of her footsteps, each sound magnified in her mind until she felt certain they were being followed. "Stay close," Daniel whispered, his voice low and steady. "We can't afford mistakes now." Her trust in him remained fragile, fractured by doubt and sharpened by Marcus's warning. Yet she had no choice but to follow, each step tethering her to his lead. Every turn seemed to narrow the world, funneling them deeper into the city's underbelly. They stopped near an abandoned factory, its windows shattered, rusted gates sagging under the weight of years. Daniel motioned for her to wait while he pushed open a side entrance, the screech of metal loud in the stillness. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decay, but it offered shelter. They slipped into the darkness, the door clanging shut behind them, echoing like a gunshot. Elena leaned against the wall, her breath ragged. "How long do you think we have before they find us again?" Daniel shook his head, his expression grim. "Not long. They're skilled, and they've marked you as their target. But we can use this place, at least until dawn. After that, we move." Elena nodded, though unease coiled tighter around her chest. She placed the notebook on a makeshift table, a slab of metal supported by rusting beams, and opened it again. Her father's handwriting stretched the pages, tracing numbers, dates, and coded phrases. The message repeated in her mind. "The key is hidden where the beginning was forged." What if the beginning wasn't just a place, she murmured aloud. What if it was an idea, a plan? Daniel joined her, his brow furrowing as he studied the words. Your father always thought several steps ahead. If it is an idea, then the notebook must contain the map to that beginning.
He tapped the corner of a page where a series of symbols was intertwined with numbers.
This isn't random.
It's coordinates. Alina's pulse quickened as she studied the markings. They were arranged with precision, too deliberate to be meaningless. They could lead to the heart of her father's legacy and the consortium's darkest secret if they were coordinates. Before they could say more, a sound pierced the silence, a faint creak, almost imperceptible, but enough to freeze both of them in place. Daniel raised a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. He moved toward the shadows near the far entrance, his pistol drawn, each step calculated. Alina's breath caught as she clutched the notebook, her ears straining to grab any sound. Then it came again, the shuffle of a boot against concrete. They were not alone. The next moment erupted in chaos.
Figures surged from the darkness, their movements swift and coordinated. Elena barely had time to duck as a bullet ricocheted off the wall behind her. Daniel fired in return, the flash of the muzzle lighting up the factory's broken walls. "Elena, run!" he shouted. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up, sprinting toward the far side of the factory. She hugged the notebook to her chest as she dodged between broken machinery, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. Behind her, the clash of gunfire and shouts reverberated, but she did not look back. At the far wall, she spotted a staircase leading upward. She bolted toward it, her feet pounding on the rusted steps as she climbed. The metal groaned under her weight, but she pushed higher until she reached a catwalk overlooking the chaos below. From there, she saw Daniel locked in combat with two intruders while another scanned the shadows, searching for her. Her hands trembled as she gripped the railing. She could run, slip through one of the broken windows, and escape into the night, but leaving Daniel behind would mean facing this war alone. And though she doubted him, though suspicion gnawed at every fiber of her being, something within her refused to abandon him. She shouted his name, and as his head turned, she hurled a rusted pipe from the catwalk. It clattered loudly against the floor, drawing one of the men's attention. Daniel seized the opening, striking his opponent and sending him crashing to the ground. The distraction brought him precious seconds to regain control of the fight. The intruders, realizing their advantage was waning, retreated into the shadows, melting away as swiftly as they had appeared. The factory fell silent once more, though the air crackled with the residue of violence. Daniel wiped sweat and blood from his brow as he looked up at her. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said, his voice rough. Elena descended slowly, her legs shaking with adrenaline. "And leave you to die? I couldn't." For a long moment they stood in silence, the tension between them heavier than the night outside. Then Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think. But strength won't be enough. We need to outsmart them." Elena nodded, though her mind churned with doubt. She had acted on instinct, but how long could instinct carry her in a world where every move seemed orchestrated by unseen hands? As dawn broke through the cracked windows, they left the factory and returned to the waking city. The streets were quieter now, but Elena felt the weight of invisible eyes tracking their every step. They stopped at a small diner on the outskirts, its neon sign flickering against the pale morning light. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and grease filled the air. They sat in a corner booth, both exhausted, both wary. Daniel spread a folded map from his jacket across the table. "If those symbols are coordinates, they point here," and he tapped a remote location far from the city, deep in the mountains. "If this is where your father began, then it's where we'll find the answers." Elena studied the map, her fingers tracing the route. The journey would be perilous, but the promise of truth burned brighter than her fear. She looked at Daniel, her eyes resolute. "Then that's where we go." For the first time in days, a faint smile touched his lips. "We leave tonight. But until then, we keep moving. They won't stop hunting us." As they left the diner, Elena felt the weight of the decision settle over her. The silent pursuit would not end here. It would only grow more relentless. But within her chest, alongside the fear, a flame of determination burned brighter. Whatever awaited in the mountains, she would face it. She owed that much to her father's memory and to herself. The silent pursuit had begun to shape her into something new, someone who would no longer run unthinkingly, but fight purposefully. And though the path ahead was shrouded in shadows, Elena stepped forward, ready to confront whatever truth lay hidden in the beginning. The road to the mountains stretched endlessly before Elena and Daniel, winding through forgotten towns and silent stretches of forest where the trees pressed close to the road, as if listening to their passage. The further they drove, the thinner the tether of the city became, until it vanished entirely into the rearview mirror. Elena stared out the window, the shifting scenery mirrored by the turmoil within her. Each mile brought her closer to where her father's legacy had begun, and deeper into the shadows of uncertainty. Daniel drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road, his jaw set with grim determination. The weight of unspoken words filled the space between them. Elena felt the questions clawing at her throat, but she hesitated, unsure whether the answers would steady her or destroy her fragile trust in him. Finally, she broke the silence. "Daniel, when you left them, was it because of me or what you saw?" He did not answer immediately. His hands tightened on the wheel, the knuckles pale under the strain. "Both," he said at last. "I saw what they were willing to do. I saw the destruction, the manipulation, the lives shattered for power. And then I met you and realized that your father had been right all along. He wasn't just fighting them, he was trying to preserve something worth believing in." His voice carried conviction and weariness, as though the memory of his past weighed him down more than the road ahead. Elena studied him for a moment, searching for cracks in his armor, for signs of deception, but all she saw was a man burdened by his own ghosts. As dusk fell, they stopped in a remote village tucked at the base of the mountains. It was a quiet place, its narrow streets lined with stone houses and lanterns that flickered weakly in the growing dark. They took a room in a small inn, where strangers were noticed but not questioned. That night, Elena sat by the window, gazing at the jagged silhouette of the mountains against the starless sky. The notebook lay open on her lap, the pages filled with her father's hand. The phrase echoed once more in her mind, "The key is hidden where the beginning was forged." She traced the words with her finger, as though touching them would unlock their meaning. Behind her, Daniel spoke softly, "You should try to rest. Tomorrow will be harder than anything we've faced so far." She turned, meeting his gaze. "Do you ever wonder if we'll survive this?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Every day. But I also know that if we don't try, everything your father fought for will be lost, and I can't accept that." Sleep came slowly, haunted by dreams of faceless pursuers and shadows that whispered her name. They set out again at dawn, climbing the winding path that snaked into the mountains. The air grew colder, sharper, each breath stinging Elena's lungs. The road soon gave way to a trail, too narrow for the car, and they continued on foot, their packs heavy with supplies, their silence broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. As they ascended, the forest thickened, its branches weaving a canopy that filtered the weak light of morning. Elena felt the weight of unseen eyes again, the sensation that had followed her since the station. She quickened her pace, her nerves taut. "Daniel," she whispered, "we're being followed." He stopped, scanning the trees. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a twig snapped in the distance, faint but unmistakable. Daniel's expression darkened. "Keep moving. If they want to follow us into the mountains, we'll make them regret it." They pressed on, but the unease clung to Elena like a second skin. By midday they reached a plateau where the ruins of an old monastery stood, its stone walls crumbling, its windows hollow and staring. It loomed over the path like a sentinel, silent and watchful. Elena felt a shiver crawl down her spine as she approached. "This place," she murmured. "It feels wrong." Daniel studied the ruins, his expression unreadable. "Or it feels like the beginning." Inside, the monastery was a skeleton of what it had once been. Dust and debris covered the floor, and vines crept through the broken walls. Yet a strange sense of purpose lingered in the air, as if the stones remembered what had been forged here. Elena opened the notebook again, comparing her father's sketches with the markings etched into the walls. The symbols matched. "This is it," she whispered, her heart hammering. "This is where he began." As they explored, they discovered a hidden chamber beneath the ruins, concealed by a slab of stone that bore the same symbols. With Daniel's help, Elena pushed it aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was stale, carrying the scent of secrets long buried. Torchlight from Daniel's pack illuminated the passage as they descended. The chamber below was small, its walls lined with shelves of old documents and strange devices covered in dust. At the center stood a metal chest, its surface engraved with the exact phrase from her father's notes. Elena's hands shook as she knelt before it, her fingers tracing the carvings. She pulled the key from her pocket, which she had taken from her father's belongings, and slid it into the lock. The chest opened with a groan, revealing a collection of papers, maps, and a small, intricately crafted device unlike anything she had ever seen. "This," Daniel said softly, lifting one of the documents, "is what they've been hunting. Proof of everything, the consortium's plans, their methods, their reach. And this device, it must be the key to decoding it all." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she realized the magnitude of what her father had hidden. His sacrifice had not been in vain. He had left her the means to finish what he had started. But before they could take it all, footsteps echoed down the staircase. Harsh voices followed, speaking in tones that made Elena's blood cold. They had been found. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her behind a stone pillar. "We can't let them take this," he whispered. "No matter what happens, you must escape with the notebook and the device." Elena shook her head fiercely. "I won't leave you behind." The chamber erupted as armed men descended, their guns trained on the shadows. Daniel opened fire, the muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness. Elena clutched the device to her chest, her heart pounding as bullets struck stone around her. The ruins shook with the violence of the battle, the ancient walls groaning as if mourning the chaos. Through the smoke and dust, a figure emerged at the top of the stairs. Victor. His smile was cold, his presence commanding. "At last," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. The beginning and the end, all in one place. Elena's blood froze as his eyes locked onto hers. The shadows of the mountain had revealed their truth, and now she stood on the edge of destiny, her father's legacy clutched in her hands, her choices narrowing to a single, impossible path. The ascent into shadows had led her here, but the trial had only begun. The air in Blackthorn carried a heavy stillness, as if the entire town held its breath, waiting for the storm that had been building for months to break finally. Adrian stood in the town square, his figure rigid, eyes scanning the growing crowd. Word had spread like wildfire that the truth about the mayor's corruption, the betrayals, and the suffering of the innocent would finally be revealed. The townspeople gathered not merely out of curiosity, but because they sensed that this was the moment their lives could change forever. Beside Adrian stood Elena, her hands clenched tightly, her voice low but steady as she whispered, "This is it. If we falter now, everything we've sacrificed will be for nothing." Her words carried the weight of sleepless nights, dangerous encounters, and the resilience that had fueled their pursuit of justice. Adrian nodded, though inside his chest a storm raged as violently as the one above them. He had faced death more times than he could count, but what weighed on him now was not the thought of his own life ending. It was the knowledge that if they failed, those who trusted him would pay the price. Darius emerged from the shadows, the once bitter and conflicted man now carrying himself with a grim determination. His loyalty had been tested in ways that nearly broke him, yet he was ready to fight alongside those he had once doubted. The scars on his face caught the torchlight, and his eyes met Adrian's. No words were needed between them. There was an understanding that went beyond language. From the square's edge, whispers rose as the mayor's guards appeared, their armor gleaming under the faint light. Behind them, Mayor Castor strode forward, his expression carved from arrogance and contempt. He had ruled with lies and manipulation for years, but tonight his mask slipped. The fury in his eyes betrayed the fear gnawing at him. He raised a hand, and his voice thundered across the square. "You stand here claiming to speak for justice, but all I see are traitors and fools who cannot understand the burden of leadership. Do you think exposing a few half-truths will break me? Do you think this rabble will rise against me?" The crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling through them. Adrian stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting through the night with the clarity of a blade. What we bring tonight are not half-truths, but the truth you've tried to bury. You've stolen from the people, betrayed those who trusted you, and condemned the innocent to suffer while you grew fat on their despair. Your reign ends here, Castor. At his signal, Elena unfurled a scroll containing evidence of Castor's crimes, records of stolen funds, testimonies from silenced victims, proof of his betrayal of allies. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the truth was laid bare before them. Still, Castor laughed, though the sound was brittle, hollow. You think paper and words can undo me? Power is not about truth. It is about control, and I still command the steel that will silence you. He gestured, and his guards stepped forward. The square seemed to shrink as steel met the dim light, and tension snapped like a taut bowstring. But Adrian was ready. With a shout, Darius and others who had secretly rallied to their cause surged forward. The clash was immediate and brutal, with blades ringing through the square. Sparks flew as steel struck steel, and the cries of defiance from the townspeople rose to join the chaos. Elena darted among the fighters, not with a blade but with purpose, guiding, aiding, ensuring no one was left behind. Adrian fought with precision, each movement honed by years of hardship, each strike fueled by the belief that this was the fight that would free them all. Darius fought like a man possessed, his fury finally turned against the one who had twisted his life. The mayor's guards faltered under the sheer will of those who had found their courage. 2 townsfolk rose in defiance for every guard that struck, armed with little more than farming tools and stones, but burning with conviction. The tide turned and fear crept into Castor's eyes. Seeing his power slipping away, Castor tried to flee, but Adrian intercepted him at the steps of the courthouse. Rain began to fall, cold drops splashing onto stone and steel as the 2 men faced each other. Castor's blade trembled in his hand, his voice desperate now. You don't understand, Adrian. Without me, this town will collapse. Order will dissolve into chaos. I am the only one strong enough to hold it together. Adrian's voice was steady, unwavering. Strength without justice is tyranny. You never held this town together, you strangled it. Tonight, Blackthorn chooses freedom. With a final clash, Adrian disarmed him. Castor stumbled, his blade clattering to the ground. The crowd surrounded them, no longer silent observers but active witnesses to the fall of a tyrant. Adrian did not strike the final blow. Instead, he stepped aside, letting the people see the man who had once claimed to be their savior now broken, trembling, and defeated. The townspeople surged forward, voices rising in defiance and relief. Castor was dragged away, not to be executed in vengeance, but to face judgment for his crimes. For the first time in years, the people of Blackthorn felt the weight of oppression lift. As dawn broke over the town, the storm passed, leaving behind a sky streaked with gold and crimson. The square, scarred by the night's battle, now carried an air of renewal. Adrian stood at its center, exhausted but resolute. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes reflecting relief and sorrow. It's over, she whispered, but Adrian shook his head. No, it's only the beginning. Justice is not won in a single night, it must be protected daily. Blackthorn is free, but we must learn to heal, build, and guard against those who seek to chain us again. Darius stepped forward, his face marked with blood and grime, yet his voice steady. Then we will stand together. No more divisions, no more shadows. We rebuild not as broken pieces, but as one. The crowd cheered, their voices carrying across the hills, echoing into the dawn. Hope, fragile yet undeniable, had been reborn. In that moment, Adrian felt the weight of his journey, the pain, the betrayals, the sacrifices, shift into something else. It was not triumph or glory, but the quiet strength of knowing that light could rise even in the darkest night. And though battles still lay ahead, Blackthorn had chosen its path, and for the first time in a long while, it was the path of freedom. The story of betrayal and redemption, of loss and unity, would live on in their hearts. not as a legend but as a reminder that justice was never beyond reach, so long as those were willing to fight for it. And as the sun rose higher, washing the town in light, Adrian knew the reckoning was not the end, but the dawn of a new beginning.